I always believed my family had my best interests at heart. Growing up, I worked hard for everything I had. Money was always tight, but I never asked for help. I took extra shifts, saved every penny, and still struggled to pay bills. My family, on the other hand, lived comfortably. They weren't rich, but they never seemed to struggle the way I did. Whenever I asked about my late grandfather's inheritance, they would brush it off. There wasn't much left, they said. The hospital bills took most of it. I trusted them. After all, why would they lie? Years passed, and life didn't get any easier. I worked late nights, sometimes skipping meals just to make rent. My siblings, meanwhile, bought new cars, went on vacations, and lived well beyond their means. I figured they had good jobs or were just better with money. It never occurred to me that they had something I didn't. Then, by pure accident, I found out the truth. One day, I was helping my mother clean out the attic when I stumbled upon an old box filled with legal papers. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just going through dusty files. That's when I saw it, an official letter from my grandfather's lawyer. It was dated right after his passing. My heart pounded as I read the words. My grandfather had left me a significant amount of money, more than I could have ever imagined, and my family knew. They had known for years. At first, I thought there had to be a mistake. Maybe the money was never received, maybe the will was changed. But as I dug deeper, I uncovered more documents. Bank transfers, account statements. My name had been erased from everything. The inheritance had been stolen right from under me. I confronted my mother first. Her face turned pale when I showed her the papers. She stuttered, made excuses. "You were too young. You wouldn't have known what to do with that kind of money." Then she shifted the blame. "We used it for the family. It wasn't just for us. It helped everyone." But that was a lie. It hadn't helped me. It had only kept me struggling while they lived off my rightful share. My siblings reacted differently. My older brother laughed, as if it were no big deal. "You're making a fuss over nothing," he said. "It was years ago." My sister tried to justify it. "You never asked," she shrugged. "We figured you didn't need it." My father barely spoke, avoiding my eyes. That's when I realized none of them felt guilty. They weren't sorry. They never planned on telling me. If I hadn't found those papers, they would have taken that secret to their graves. Anger boiled inside me, but I didn't let it show. I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. They had already stolen from me. The only thing left to do was take it back. I gathered every document, every transaction, every proof of their lies. I took it to a lawyer, someone who specialized in inheritance fraud. As soon as he saw the papers, his expression turned serious. "This is a clear case," he said. "They had no legal right to touch that money. My family had left a trail of evidence without even realizing it. There were forged signatures, illegal withdrawals, misused funds. They had been so confident in their lies that they never thought I would question anything. That confidence would be their downfall. The legal process was long, but I was patient. My lawyer moved swiftly, freezing the accounts they had used. My family was caught completely off guard when they received the legal notice. My mother called, crying, begging me to reconsider. "We're family," she pleaded. "We can work this out privately." My brother was furious, threatening to cut me off completely. My sister tried to negotiate. "If we just split what's left, would you drop this?" But there was nothing to negotiate. They had stolen everything, and now they had to face the consequences. The case went to court, and for the first time, my family had to answer for what they had done. The judge didn't take long to see the truth. My inheritance was rightfully mine, and they were ordered to return every cent. But the money was long gone. They had spent it on their own luxuries, assuming they would never have to pay it back. The judge's ruling hit them hard. Any remaining assets would be seized, and they were legally required to compensate me. My brother lost his car, my sister had to sell her house, my parents were drowning in debt. The family that once lived so comfortably was now struggling to make ends meet, just like I had, for years. They thought I would forgive them. They thought, after the case was over, I would move on and things would go back to normal. But there was no normal anymore. I cut them off completely. They called, sent messages, even showed up at my door. I ignored them all. They had watched me struggle, knowing they held the key to my freedom, and did nothing. I owed them nothing now. Years later, I built a life for myself. With my inheritance restored, I invested wisely, started my own business, and never looked back. Meanwhile, my family's downfall continued. My brother lost everything to bad investments. My sister's debts piled up. My parents were forced to downsize, moving into a small apartment they could barely afford. Their betrayal had cost them more than just money. It had cost them me. One day, my mother called from an unknown number. I picked up out of curiosity. She sounded different, quieter. "We made a mistake," she admitted. "We should have told you the truth." But it was too late. The damage was done. They had chosen greed over family, and now they were paying the price. As I hung up, I felt no sadness, no regret, only peace. Because in the end, the people who tried to steal my future had only destroyed their own. Months passed, and my life flourished without them. I expanded my business, made smart investments, and finally lived without the constant financial stress that had once weighed me down. My inheritance, which they had selfishly stolen, was now working for me the way my grandfather had intended. I often wondered what he would have thought if he had known what they had done. Would he have been disappointed, angry, or just heartbroken to see how easily his family had turned against each other for money? Meanwhile, my family's situation kept getting worse. My brother, once cocky and self-assured, was drowning in debt. He had always lived beyond his means, confident that money would never be a problem. But after the court ruling, with his assets seized and no inheritance left to sustain his lifestyle, reality hit him hard. He tried to start a business, but without financial backing, it failed quickly. He even attempted to reach out to me, asking for a loan as if nothing had happened. When I ignored him, he sent a bitter message. "So, you're just going to let your own family suffer? Thought you were better than that." I laughed at the irony. He had no problem watching me struggle for years while he enjoyed what was rightfully mine. But now that the roles were reversed, he expected sympathy. My sister fared no better. She had used my inheritance to secure her dream home, but when the court ruled against them, she had to sell it to pay her debts. The woman who had once looked down on me for renting a tiny apartment now found herself searching for a cheaper place to live. She resented me for it. In her mind, I was the villain, the one who had destroyed our family over a little bit of money. That was the biggest joke of all. The same people who had lied, stolen, and manipulated suddenly wanted to pretend that money didn't matter. But it had mattered to them when they were spending mine. My parents were the worst off. Without my grandfather's inheritance to cushion them, they were left with nothing but their own poor decisions. My mother tried calling me over and over, leaving voicemails filled with guilt-tripping messages. "We're your parents, we raised you, we made mistakes, but we're still your family." I deleted every single one without listening past the first few seconds. My father, always the quiet one, didn't call at all. I heard from distant relatives that he had taken the loss harder than anyone. Maybe he had known all along that what they did was wrong, but had gone along with it anyway. Now he was paying the price for his silence. At first, I thought they would try to fight back. Maybe they'd appeal the court ruling, try to drag me back into a legal battle. But they didn't. They had already lost too much. They had underestimated me, thinking I would never question them, never dig deeper, never fight back. That was their greatest mistake. They had thought of me as weak, someone they could manipulate. They never realized that all the years of struggle had made me stronger than they could ever be. The final blow came when my grandfather's old lawyer reached out to me again. He had been following the case and wanted to meet. When we sat down, he handed me an envelope. "Your grandfather left this for you," he said. "I was supposed to give it to you when you turned 25, but, well, you know what happened." I hesitated before opening it, my hands shaking slightly. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandfather. If you're reading this, it means the truth has finally come to light. I always knew you were different from the rest. You had a good heart, and I wanted to make sure you had a secure future. If they kept this from you, then they have shown their true selves. Don't waste your time on them. Build your own life and never let greed or betrayal change who you are. Tears pricked my eyes, but I wasn't sad. I felt free. My grandfather had known. He had known what kind of people they were, even before he was gone. He had trusted me even when they didn't. And now I had proven him right. I left the meeting with a clear mind. I had spent months feeling anger, resentment, and betrayal, but in that moment, I let it all go. My family had made their choice. They had chosen greed, and now they were left with nothing. Meanwhile, I had everything I needed. Not just money, but peace, security, and most importantly, freedom from them. A year later, I heard that my parents had moved into a small rental home, barely able to afford the bills. My brother had disappeared from social circles, embarrassed by his downfall. My sister was still bitter, blaming me for her problems instead of accepting responsibility. None of it affected me anymore. I had moved on, leaving them in the past where they belonged. One day, I received a message from an unknown number. I know we made mistakes. I just want to talk. It was my father. I stared at the message for a long time before finally deleting it. Some bridges are meant to be burned. Years passed, and my life only got better. The business I had built flourished beyond what I had ever imagined. I invested wisely, expanded into new ventures, and created the kind of financial security I once only dreamed of. I no longer worried about rent, bills, or whether I could afford to take a day off. I traveled, made meaningful connections, and built a future that was entirely my own. Every decision I made was based on what I wanted, not on desperation, not on survival, but on true choice. My family, on the other hand, continued to spiral. The inheritance they had stolen was long gone, and with it, their comfortable lifestyles. My brother, once so arrogant, bounced from job to job, never able to regain the life he once had. He had built everything on money that wasn't his, and without it, he had nothing to fall back on. Rumors reached me that he had gotten involved in shady business deals, desperate for a quick way out of his financial troubles. But nothing worked. He had spent years believing he was untouchable, only to find himself drowning in debt with no way to escape. My sister, who had once looked down on me for struggling, now struggled herself. She had always taken pride in being the one who had it all together, but after losing her home and lifestyle, reality hit her hard. She blamed everyone but herself. Whenever our mutual acquaintances mentioned her, the story was always the same. She was bitter, resentful, convinced that I had ruined her life. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had stolen what was mine, yet I was the villain in her story. My parents' situation was the most pathetic of all. They had once been the head of the family, the ones in control. Now they were just two aging people struggling to keep up with a life they could no longer afford. They moved into a small, cramped apartment in a neighborhood far less comfortable than the one they had lived in before. My mother, who had once controlled everything with an iron grip, was now forced to live modestly, the very thing she had tried to avoid by stealing from me. My father, always the quieter one, had completely withdrawn. He no longer spoke much, ashamed of what had become of them. At first, they tried to keep up appearances, pretending that things weren't as bad as they were. But it wasn't long before they cracked. They started reaching out to distant relatives, asking for help, but no one wanted to get involved. They had burned too many bridges, lied to too many people. The sympathy they expected never came. Some relatives even told me they had tried to paint me as the villain, claiming I had turned on my own family for no reason. But the truth was already known. People had seen how they lived when they had my money, and they saw how they lived without it. No one was fooled. Eventually, my mother reached out to me again. This time, she didn't even try to manipulate me. There were no guilt trips, no fake apologies, just desperation. "We need help," she wrote. "We have nowhere else to turn." For a brief moment, I considered replying. not because I felt sympathy, but because I wanted to hear her say it out loud. I wanted to hear her admit that the money they had stolen was gone, that they had nothing left. But then I stopped myself. They had already made their choice. They had chosen greed over family, lies over love, and they had spent years watching me struggle, knowing they could have helped and choosing not to. They had let me suffer, all while living comfortably on money meant for me. Now, when the roles were reversed, they expected me to save them. I never responded. That was the last time I ever heard from them. Whatever happened to them after that, I don't know. I never checked, never asked. They had spent years keeping me in the dark about what was rightfully mine, so I left them in the dark about my life. The final irony? I didn't even need their money anymore. The inheritance had given me a start, but my success came from my own hard work, my own intelligence, my own determination. If they had simply been honest from the beginning, if they had given me what was mine, we all could have thrived. But instead, they had let their greed consume them. They thought they were robbing me of my future, but in the end, the only thing they destroyed was themselves. Time moved on, and so did I. The scars of their betrayal faded, replaced by a life I had built on my own terms. My business continued to thrive, growing beyond even my own expectations. What had started as a small investment, one that should have been mine from the beginning, had turned into something far greater. I had financial security, peace of mind, and most importantly, complete independence from the people who had once controlled my life. Despite cutting ties, I still heard whispers about my family from mutual acquaintances. My brother had finally hit rock bottom. After years of bad decisions and reckless spending, he had no choice but to move back in with my parents. The same man who once laughed at my struggles was now living under the same cramped roof as the people who had ruined his life, just as much as they had tried to ruin mine. He had no savings, no real skills, and no one left to take advantage of. His downfall was slow, painful, and entirely of his own making. My sister had remarried, hoping her new husband's money would restore the life she had lost, but people told me it was obvious she wasn't happy. She had gone from someone who once prided herself on being better than me to someone barely holding on to the lifestyle she believed she deserved. She resented me more than ever, still convinced I was the reason for her misfortunes. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. The fact that she had stolen, lied, and manipulated meant nothing to her, only that I had fought back and won. And my parents? They had become nothing more than ghosts of their former selves. Once respected, once comfortable, once proud, now they were just two aging people struggling to get by. My mother had always believed she was the smartest person in the room, always the one pulling the strings. Now she was powerless. The money she had stolen, the security she had clung to, it was all gone. My father, who had once stayed silent through it all, had withdrawn completely. Maybe he finally understood what he had allowed to happen, or maybe he was just too ashamed to face the consequences. Either way, neither of them had anything left. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I received a letter, no return address, just my name written in shaky, familiar handwriting. I debated throwing it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, scanning the words with no emotion. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand. We didn't do it out of hatred. We did it because we thought we could, because we believed you wouldn't notice, and because we told ourselves that as long as you didn't know, it wouldn't hurt you. But we were wrong. We see that now, and we have paid the price. No apology, no remorse, just an acknowledgement of their own downfall. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't need to respond. There was nothing left to say. Their betrayal had once been the most painful thing in my life, but now it barely mattered. I had won, not just in court, not just financially, but in the way that truly counted. I had broken free from their control. They had tried to steal my future, but in the end, they had only destroyed their own. And that was justice enough. Years passed, and my life only continued to grow. The weight of their betrayal had long since lifted, replaced by a deep sense of peace. My business had expanded beyond anything I could have imagined, and I had created a life filled with stability, success, and genuine happiness. The struggle they had once forced upon me no longer defined me. It had only made me stronger. Occasionally, I would hear about my family in passing, but the updates became fewer and fewer. They had faded into the background, no longer relevant to my world. My brother had tried to start over multiple times, bouncing between failed business ideas and short-term jobs. His pride never allowed him to admit he needed help, and without my inheritance to sustain him, he had to face the reality of the real world. I heard he had taken loans he couldn't pay back, always believing the next big opportunity would save him. But nothing ever did. My sister had settled into a life she wasn't happy with, though she would never admit it. Her new husband had money, but he controlled it tightly, something she had never experienced before. She had spent years living off what wasn't hers, and now she had to ask permission for every expense. People said she tried to maintain appearances, but the bitterness was always there, just beneath the surface. She still blamed me for everything. In her eyes, I was the one who had ruined her life, not her own choices. But it didn't matter anymore. Her opinion of me had no power. As for my parents, they had become shadows of the people they once were. My mother, once so confident in her ability to manipulate and control, had lost everything she had schemed to keep. The luxurious home, the easy lifestyle, the sense of superiority, all gone. I heard she had reached out to distant relatives for help, but few wanted to get involved. People had seen what they had done to me, and no one wanted to be their next target. One day, I received an unexpected call from a lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years. "Your mother has named you as her emergency contact," he said. The words stunned me. After everything, she had still put my name down? He hesitated before continuing. "She's not doing well. She's in financial and legal trouble. She thought you might want to know." I sat in silence for a moment, letting his words settle. Then, with complete certainty, I responded, "I don't." I had nothing left to say to them, nothing left to give. They had made their choices, and so had I. The past no longer had a hold on me, and their downfall no longer concerned me. I had moved on, and that was the greatest victory of all. As I hung up, I glanced at my desk, where a framed quote sat, a reminder of everything I had learned. "Success is the best revenge." And I had never felt more successful. Years later, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be angry at them. The pain, the betrayal, the sleepless nights spent wondering how my own family could do what they did. It all felt like a distant memory. I had built a new life, one filled with stability, real friendships, and a future I had carved out for myself. They were no longer a part of my story. Then, one evening, as I was closing my office, my assistant walked in with a hesitant look on her face. "There's someone waiting outside for you," she said. "She says she's your mother." I froze for a second. It had been years since I had last seen her. A part of me thought I never would again. But there she was, standing just beyond the glass doors, looking smaller, older, and completely out of place in the world I had built. I stepped outside, but I didn't greet her. I just stood there, waiting. She was the one who had come to me after all. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight she could no longer bear. "I know I don't deserve to ask this," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. "But I have nowhere else to go." I let her words hang in the air between us. There was a time when hearing her say something like that would have given me satisfaction. A time when I would have dreamed of this exact moment, when the mother who had stolen from me, who had watched me struggle without an ounce of remorse, would finally have to face the consequences of her own actions. But now that it was happening, I felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, no desire for revenge, just indifference. "I spent years struggling," I said, my voice calm. "Years believing I wasn't enough, that I had to work twice as hard just to survive. And the whole time, you knew.
You let me suffer when you could have changed everything with a single conversation. You stole from me, and you didn't care. Not until now, when you have nothing left." She blinked, as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. "We didn't think," she started, but I cut her off. "You did think. You thought about yourselves. You thought about what you could get away with, and now you're here because it didn't work out the way you planned." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. "Please," she whispered. "I just need help. I don't have anyone else." I tilted my head slightly, considering her words. Then I smiled, a small, knowing smile, the kind that came from years of clarity. Neither did I. And with that, I turned and walked away. That was the last time I ever saw her. Months passed after that final encounter, and not once did I look back. I had no regrets, no lingering doubts, and certainly no guilt. My decision had been made long ago, the moment I discovered the truth about what they had done. There was no space in my life for people who had knowingly betrayed me, no matter what excuses they tried to make. My business continued to thrive, and so did I. Without the weight of my past dragging me down, I was free to focus on the future. I traveled to places I had once only dreamed of, made connections with people who truly valued me, and expanded my ventures beyond what I had ever thought possible. Every success, every milestone was a reminder that I had won, not because I had taken revenge, but because I had risen above them. Occasionally, I would still hear whispers about my family through mutual acquaintances. My brother had lost everything, buried under a mountain of debt and bad decisions. His arrogance had driven away any support he might have had, and without my inheritance to sustain him, he had nothing left to fall back on. My sister had settled into a life of quiet resentment, trapped in a marriage where she had no financial control. She had spent years believing she was superior to me, and now she was completely dependent on someone else. And my parents? They had faded into irrelevance. The last I heard, my mother had tried reaching out to distant relatives for help, but no one wanted to get involved. People had seen how she had treated me, how she had stolen from her own child, and they wanted no part in her downfall. My father, once the silent enabler, had become just another forgotten man with nothing left to his name. One day, I received an email from an old family friend. It was short, just a single sentence. "Your mother isn't doing well. Thought you should know." I stared at it for a long time before closing it without replying. She had already made her choice. Now, she had to live with it. I, on the other hand, had a life to enjoy. Years passed, and the past became nothing more than a distant memory. I no longer thought about them, no longer wondered what they were doing, or if they ever regretted their choices. My life had moved forward in ways they could never have imagined. I had built something real, something that was mine, earned through my own hard work and resilience. One evening, as I sat in my office, going through plans for a new business expansion, a notification popped up on my phone, a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mom passed away yesterday. Thought you should know." No name, no other details, just those few words. I put my phone down and stared at it for a moment. I waited, searching for some kind of reaction within myself. Sadness, regret, relief? But there was nothing. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. In the end, she had died the way she had lived, alone with her own decisions. There was nothing left for me to mourn. I deleted the message without replying and turned back to my work. My life was waiting for me, and I had no intention of wasting another second on the people who had once tried to steal my future. Because in the end, I had won. Not through revenge, not through anger, but by choosing to move forward while they remained stuck in the ruins they had built for themselves. And that was the greatest justice of all.